As somebody who both uses the Peloton bike and Peloton tread regularly, as well as track all of my information in a Whoop band, I wanted to learn more about how I could use Whoop and the data I get from it, like HRV and sleep, to better optimize my Peloton schedule and get better results. And so my search led to Justin Roethlingshoefer, who is a 3-time best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and performance expert who's worked with the NHL for over a decade. So I reached out to Justin to see what he could tell me about how to better optimize my Peloton schedule using my Whoop data.
So whenever somebody's usually using something like a Peloton bike, they've got a variety of different classes, and it just doesn't need to be the bike. It can be their strength classes, their cardio classes, their conditioning classes, their yoga classes. It's like, how do I use it to its maximal capacity? Like, how do I use this tool? The Peloton, as well as a lot of these other fitness companies, have created such a great library and a great tool to be able to improve fitness, improve overall health and wellness. But for a lot of people using it, it can become really confusing. Like, do I do sprint work on one day? Do I do long distance on another day? Do I just go for a casual bike ride one day? Should I do strength today? Should I do yoga today? Should I hit the Peloton tread today? Like, there's so many questions that can be very intimidating and very overwhelming. When all of a sudden you now put on top of this that you have these wearable devices that can help clear some of this, I guess, process up. And so if you're looking at, like, say, a Whoop band, for example, and you have your heart rate variability data, well, HRV is really just your body's language of how it's communicating, how our body's truly adapting to the stress and strain that we put it through the last 24, 48, 72 hours. And so that's what heart rate variability does for us and the information that it gives us. Now, the higher heart rate variability, quite frankly, it's just telling us it's not good or bad. It's just telling us that our body's adapted really well to the stress and strain we put it under. If we wake up with a elevated heart rate variability, that means we're optimized and ready to take on stress and strain. So maybe you're gonna go onto that Peloton tread and do a high intensity interval class, paired with a strength class. And then you wake up the next morning, you might see a slight dip. You know what? Let's go for a little bit more of a steady state ride. Let's maybe go through a yoga class. Let's go through something not quite so intense that's gonna give us a little bit of a greater window to ultimately allow us to recover again. If we start to see that trend where our heart rate variability isn't coming back up, it's not necessarily saying that we're not fit to take one of those more intense classes, but it also drives us to look at what's actually going on in our lifestyle that may not be allowing us to adapt very well. Maybe it's those 5 beers every single night that we're having, or maybe it's the fact that we're only sleeping 4 hours a night, or maybe it's the fact that we just run all day and never give us time to ourselves. So when we come into our morning workout, we're not prepared to handle the stress that we're looking at.
And what Justin was telling me made complete sense, but I wanted him to really get into the specifics of what I could do with this data that could directly affect how I am choosing my Peloton workouts.
It's so frustrating sometimes when my wattage isn't going up, my legs feel heavy, I feel tired, I'm not improving. And you sometimes feel like you've hit this plateau. And a lot of times it's just because we're under recovered. We haven't given ourselves the time to ultimately build back up the capacity to handle more, to get ourselves to continually grow and get out of those plateaus that we feel like we hit so often. Because more is not necessarily better. If we can work smarter with data that backs the decisions we make, we're gonna see a lot more improvement, a lot more regularly, and ultimately empower us to make those decisions at a high level.
And finally, I wanted even more examples. So I asked Justin to give me a very specific example of somebody who uses the Whoop data to influence their Peloton schedule throughout the week.
So first things first, I want you to choose a treadmill run, or I want you to choose a bike on that Peloton and remember what that class is. If it's a high intensity interval class, if it's a long distance ride, whatever that goal is, I want you to write that one down, star it, favorite it, whatever, because that's going to be our baseline. That's what we're going to continue to come back to test how our improvement is. So say we're going to choose the Emma Lovewell 15-minute hit ride. Let's tag that. Let's go do it. Let's just get into it. Put the max effort that you can forward today. See what your total number is. Write that down. Record it. I know it stores it in the Peloton app, but this is an easy way in which we can just know what's going on. From here, what we're gonna wanna do is start training, okay? So the next morning we're gonna wake up, what's our heart rate variability look like? Is it above or below our average? How did that work for us, and what did it take out of us yesterday? Did our body adapt to that? From this point, we want to start building a little bit more capacity. So we want to start, as a rule of thumb, 2 rides, 2 sections a week are going to be somewhere in that 30 to 40 minute range. Something a little bit more steady state, something that is going to allow for that aerobic capacity to start building. 2 times a week, we really want to push. We want to go for those HIIT classes, something that's going to go for maximal power, maximal wattage, and that's going to ultimately lead you to 4 classes a week. We're then going to want to look at the other 2 days, and those are going to be something like a hills ride, something that is a little bit intermittent in between those 2. And that 7th day, let's take a rest day. Let's do some form of active yoga. And we start to use that as a framework. We can either add in an extra recovery day, an extra yoga, get off the bike, maybe do an extra strength day, based on what our heart rate variability is telling us. If our heart rate variability stays high, let's keep the intensity high. Let's go with a HIIT ride. If our heart rate variability is low, let's go with something a little bit more in a recovery basis, something a little bit more longer distance, something a little bit less intense, and also something that maybe potentially gets us off the bike using some different muscle sets that allows us to, again, engage in that recovery.
Now, if you want to learn more about Peloton, Whoop, or Justin, I have links to all of that in the video description below, so make sure to check it out. And if you want to see my review of the Whoop 4.0, which came out at the end of last year, make sure to watch that here. Thanks so much for watching, and keep checking back in with Connect the Watts for all of the latest in connected fitness.